welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Ovis Partners. I'm your host, Ed McKnight. And today on the show, we're talking about buying a house versus investing in shares. Now, this is really interesting. I had a number of you listeners of the show share with me this article from Stuff, last week I think it was. Young renters could be $600,000 better off than homeowners at retirement. Here is why. And a number of you, including Andrew, said, can you do some modelling off this, see whether what they've put out is true?
And I've got to thank Jason for this, because I emailed Ed and he emailed back no, and then Jason emailed and then he did it.
Well, no, it's because I thought surely nobody's going to buy into this. Surely nobody's going to really think that somebody renting is going to be better off than a homeowner at retirement.
Well, Colonel Well said so.
Well, we had about 6 people email me this, and so I've always got a rule that if 3 people ask the same question, we'll do a show on it.
You know, Jason and I have just got 3 email accounts each that we email you from.
Okay. So this article was put out by Stuff, but it had research by Colonel Wealth, which is a fund manager, talking about that people who invest in shares would be better off than people owning homes. And they shared a story of a young investor, Kanati, who was, I think she's 24, and is at the moment interested in investing in shares as opposed to buying a home, which is fine. Everybody's got their own personal reasons for making their financial decisions. But Andrew, why are we seeing some people saying that renting is better than buying a house?
Oh, this always happens when interest rates go up. So when interest rates go up on a mortgage, then yeah, it's cheaper to rent a house than it is to own a house, because you're going to pay more in interest if you own the house. But you've got to think about the big picture, which is why I wanted some modelling done around this. And look, if I was to be really cynical, and I am, I'd say, well, the research is provided by people that want you to buy shares. And if you don't buy a house, you've got more money to invest in shares.
And of course, there are a lot of share-based companies at the moment. You got Hatch, you got Stake, you got Kernel, you got Sharesies, and
didn't Tony Alexander have a quote on this as well?
I remember him writing probably about 12 months ago saying that once interest rates go up and house prices come down, he was saying that you will start to see people saying that you should rent instead. They'll be wrong, just as they've always been wrong. But what I do want to say is that if you look at the cost to own a property versus the cost to rent it, and you guys watching this on YouTube can see this, but I'll explain it for those who are listening to the podcast version. It is cheaper to rent when you first start buying a property. So I've modeled this out based on a property that I actually own. It's probably worth about $600,000 in today's market and rents for about $460. It's a 2-bedroom apartment in Christchurch. Now, if you were to buy that property today with a 10% deposit and you include the rates, insurance, maintenance, at today's rates, or I think I might have actually... Let me just double check for you, Andrew. I've used a constant 5% interest rate, though because today's interest rate is 6%, it'd be a bit higher, but average it out 5% for the whole time of owning a property. It would cost you $765 a week to own this place. And it would cost you only $460 a week to rent. Now, bear in mind, some of that mortgage payment goes to paying back the bank. So you are getting ahead somewhat financially by paying down debt. But what do you see? Over time, the cost to rent a property keeps going up by about 4% a year. And because of that, the cost to rent a property goes up exponentially. What happens for owning the property? It stays pretty flat, because the way a table mortgage works, which is a normal principal and interest mortgage here in New Zealand, is your repayments are calculated so you make the exact same repayment every single week. And in this situation, it is $669 a week every single week for the life of that loan, as long as the interest rate doesn't change. Of course, your rates, your insurance, your maintenance, that goes up over time. But the bulk of your repayment, which is your mortgage, doesn't increase. And that's why the cost to own a property is relatively flat over the 30 years you have that mortgage, but the cost to rent keeps going up. And so eventually, once you've owned a property for about 14 years in this example, it becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to own the property compared to renting the property.
And this isn't factoring in what you have in equity in the property either.
No
This
capital
is
growth.
just cash flow.
No paying back debt, just cash flow. And so people are right. When you buy a property, and I think people know this, when a lot of people, young people, talk to their parents about buying a property, they know that the first couple of years are often quite hard because you've got quite high mortgage repayments compared to what you would pay in renting. But over time, because your income goes up by, for example, 4% a year is pretty standard that we'd use, but your mortgage repayment stays the same as long as your interest rate doesn't change. And of course, interest rates do change. They go up and they go down. That is what allows people over time, homeowners, to be relatively better off compared to renters. And then, of course, once you've paid off your mortgage, the amount that it costs you to own a home goes down quite significantly. So if we take this example from Colonel, they started by talking about, I think it was like a 23-year-old person who eventually wants to retire. If you look at what happens after 40 years of owning a home, it would then cost you $212 a week to own that home, rates, insurance, maintenance. But if you were to rent that property, it would cost you $2,200 a week.
It's going to erode your shares pretty quickly.
Well, just bear in mind, people are going to, listening to this, are going to say, who's paying $2,200 a week to rent a property? We're talking about after 40 years of inflation, but I'm trying to give you an example of it is 10 times cheaper to own a property at that point after 40 years of ownership compared to renting a property. Now, of course, this article was all about, well, what if you took the money that you could save initially over those initial 14 years by renting, what if you took that and put that into KiwiSaver? Well, we've modelled it out, and it's interesting to see what happens over time. Now, let's take a look at this modelling from Colonel.
Ed, did you get the numbers from this article so you actually could compare our modelling versus theirs?
Now, it's very interesting because I did hit Colonel up. Kat Emerson is the head of marketing, who I've met a couple of times before. They have previously purchased advertising in Informed Investor magazine. So I asked them for the modelling, and I didn't receive that, but that's okay. So I've tried to backward induct it. And you guys on YouTube, you can see my spreadsheet. Look, there's a whole heap of
You'll link in
columns
the
here.
show notes, won't you?
Oh, only if producer David reminds me. But what I've tried to do is run all of these numbers and say, well, what would happen if you took the money when renting was cheaper and you put that into KiwiSaver?
So you invest in that.
Yeah, and then, of course, you don't take your money out of KiwiSaver to buy a house. You just leave it in there. But then also, well, what happens when owning the house is cheaper? Well, we better take the money we would have otherwise put into renting and put that into shares, into your KiwiSaver instead. So trying to make a real fair comparison. I tell you what, I don't know who did their modelling, because when I did mine, and I'm assuming that house prices go up by 5% a year and KiwiSaver goes up by, I thought, a pretty generous 8% per year. And they had somebody on KiwiSaver retiring with something like 6.9 million, and somebody
6.9.
Yeah, about what was it? Let's look at the article. I've got it right here in front of me. Let's have a wee look, see at what it happened to be. 8.8 million. Renter would have 8.8 million, and I think it was 8.2 million for the homeowner. It was an enormous amount of money. I've got no idea how they got it, because when I've run the numbers...
It does say liquid assets, so the homeowner might have that over and above their house then, because house isn't...
No. You didn't read the article closely enough.
No, I didn't.
They 8.8 million for the person. Let's find it now, because otherwise people will say we don't know what we're talking about. Homeowner, total equity of 8.26 million. Renter 8.89. Now, I tell you what, I'd be as happy as her if I had 8.89 million. I'm talking about the person in the article. Now, when I've run the numbers, I've got my person who buys a house retiring with 6.1 million, and my person who's just renting, I've got them down at 2.2 million, for example. Now, that's still a lot of money, but it's not quite the 8.9 that I was expecting. Now, let's just see what would happen if we change some of the assumptions, because this is what it all comes down to. I mean, you can model whatever you like, but it all comes down to the numbers you put in. So let's put KiwiSaver up to 10%. And
That's very generous.
Oh, it's way too high, don't get me wrong. But let's put capital growth down to 4%. And let's put the mortgage interest rate at 6% across the life of the loan. Would never happen, but let's just put it in to see what would happen. You know, is that going to make a difference? Well, it does make a difference, but we've still got the homeowner on 6 million, and we've now got the person investing in KiwiSaver at 3.2 8 million, for instance, but we're still nowhere close to the 8.9, 8.2 million that Kernel have put out.
Now, I wonder, have you taken anything out for fees?
Not in this model.
Which is really interesting because that's one of the comments that a lot of people make now around KiwiSaver providers. No comment on Kernel's fee structure because I don't know what it is, but a lot of people saying that they're getting hit with heavy fees because the interesting thing is you put in $1, your employer puts in $1, the government puts in their $500 a year, and so you can kind of forget about how much of a fee is being taken off, even on a relatively cost-effective fee structure. When you're talking about millions of dollars, it'll be a lot of money that's going out in fees a year.
Well, it's even interesting. You look at the ANZ Conservative Fund, which last time I checked was down about 10%. You can lose 10% of the value of your assets and then still be charged your 1% fee.
That's right.
So I must admit, when I've tried to model all of this out, I haven't been able to get the exact same numbers as Kernel, and I'm still waiting on their numbers, but I didn't want to stop putting this podcast out and giving another view of the numbers while I'm waiting, which I could be waiting for a wee while.
One of the things, though, that you can't model out from a numbers perspective is just some of the other benefits of renting or owning a home. So there are lifestyle benefits as well. So if you're renting a property, you've got flexibility. So someone like yourself moved from Auckland to Christchurch, basically packed your bag and just moved one weekend. So you do have that flexibility if you wanted to go overseas. And I think given this is probably targeted towards younger people, that is a major benefit of renting because you don't really know what you want, so you might want to move around.
I love renting. I'm so up for it.
Oh, I am too. Rent vesting all the way. Benefit of owning a home, though, you can do whatever the hell you want to it. So if you want to change some of the configuration, if you want to, subject to the council's approval, of course, but if you want to paint a wall a particular colour, you can do that. You can't do that. If you want to have a dog in your 2-bedroom townhouse, you can do that, but you can't necessarily do that when you're renting. From a financial benefit, though, if you own your own house, you've also got the ability to borrow against that to buy investment properties. You might have heard about that before here on this podcast. You can't do that if you're renting.
Well, let's come back to Kanati, though. Is she an idiot because she wants to put money in KiwiSaver rather than buying her own house? And look, I don't think so at all. I mean, she has talked to there that she does want to buy a house eventually. But I think for a lot of younger Kiwis, buying your own home to live in is not as much of a driver as perhaps it has been in the past. So the reason is because we end up going to university and we end up studying a lot longer. We couple up a lot later than we used to. I remember back in the 70s, average age of marriage for a woman was 22. Now it's 31. For a guy, it was 24. Now it's 33. So they're 9 years older. Because we couple up later, we get married later, we have kids later, we study for longer, we start working later. Of course, you are naturally going to buy a house later as well. And I mean, I agree with her. I don't live in the houses that I own because I want that flexibility as well. You know, but what I do take issue with, and this is obviously not with her, but it is with people who put out modelling, is that if you are going to make some pretty bold claims, I do think you have to put out what the assumptions are as well. Now, of course, you know, Stuff in the Herald are not going to publish 2 pages worth of assumptions, but I was a bit surprised that I wasn't able to find any of this research online so that we could validate it with these numbers. But look, we'll put this model out. We will share it. So links in the description, links in the show notes if you want to check out our modelling, because I think that's a really important part of transparency when we are talking about, well, what is the right financial decision? What do the numbers say? Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Property Academy podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you want to grow your wealth through property, then it might be time to come in for a portfolio planning session. Remember, no cost to you, easy way to sign up for this. Whip out your phone, send us a text. Text the word plan to 5522. We'll give you a buzz, see if it's the right fit. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Tim McKnight. I'm going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most. Until next time.